Welcome to the Hospitality Maverick podcast with me, Michael Tingsare. We at Hospitality Mavericks are here to inspire leaders to create heart-centered and profitable businesses from the inside out, the kind that both employees and customers love and support. Thanks to BizSimply for sponsoring this episode as our show partner. And BizSimply is the all-in-one HR, workforce management, rota and operations software designed and built by hospitality experts to make every shift run like clockwork. And we join forces to help the industry to find new ways to become even more innovative in how we lead our people, how we operate, to how we grow our businesses, to how we serve our customers. Together we want to share strategies and tools that can make the industry thrive long term, not just survive.
One of the most powerful things is for you to become increasingly conscious of who you are and what makes you tick and the things that sit under the surface that inform those subconscious behaviors. And I think if we can get kids to understand themselves better at an earlier age, we can create a kinder society which will benefit everybody.
This is Edward Francis, co-founder of a mission-driven fashion brand, Thumbprint, as well as strategy and brand consultant for a number of great hospitality brands. I really look forward meeting up with Ed in person in London to record this episode, because we have since the early days of the pandemic been connecting online, discussing the big challenges of the world as well as solutions for these. And there's no doubt that we're both on the same mission to build businesses that do more than just make a profit, to make positive impact on people, society and the planet. And today we'll dive into how Ed and his co-founder just have launched a fashion brand that from the outset is helping the world become a better place, but doing the right thing up and downstream in the supply chain, as well as setting up a charity. Ed tells his story and how he fell in love with India and how his connection with India inspired him to launch Thumbprint. We also talk about why business is the key solution to the challenges of the world and how you can lead yourself better. There's also some great advice on how you can get started to make more impact in your community. Before you tune in, please sign up for our weekly newsletter, Maverick Talk, which is packed with more Maverick insights, strategies and tools. Find the links in the show notes or visit hospitalitymavericks.com. This conversation will make you think about how you can make more impact through business. Enjoy. Today, we're really gonna dive into, as we often do here on the show, but this is gonna be an interesting one, a business that has started as a force for good from day one. And it's also something that runs through the veins and the heart and the soul of the founders. The purpose is a personal purpose. It's almost a vocation, I would say, from the conversation I've had with one of the co-founders. And they're doing one thing well, which is going to be really interesting to talk about today as well. And they are really, really focusing on to change something far away from here, but something that needs to be changed. With that said, welcome to the show, Ed. It's a great pleasure to have you here. Finally.
Thanks so much, Michael. Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy to have you here because, we've been in touch over the pandemic a couple of times online, but we never met face to face. So this was our first face to face conversation today here in Soho. So I'm really looking forward to hear about the new project, Thumbprint, and also hear a bit about what else you're up to, because I think there's a lot to learn from your journey, even though it's early days, as you said before we went on air. But tell people a bit that don't know Edward Francis, what you're all about, your journey, and what all this new things is about, selling T-shirts.
Indeed. Well, yeah, thank you so much for having me here and also for deviating slightly from your very strict hospitality part of the podcast. So Mavericks we might be trying to be, but we are as a business inherently connected to hospitality. So yeah, so I guess my background as in terms of the kind of potted history was I dropped out of school because I was spending too much time working in a local restaurant. So I grew up in rural Oxfordshire, and I think hospitality excited me even back when I was 15, 16 years old because, it seemed to open up my eyes not only to this new industry, but also to this kind of exciting world that attracted really interesting people. And, growing up, we didn't eat out a lot. We didn't necessarily always have a huge amount of money. So we lived a lovely, very comfortable life. But I guess hospitality opened up my eyes. And so I moved to London at 20 and I ended up working for Soho House for a number of years, and then ETM Group, and then ran a couple of independents. And I think, hospitality is in my blood. And since 2015, I've been initially just helping to open restaurants as a consultant, and then more latterly kind of really getting my head around the idea of brand and the power of brand when you look at it as I call it, emotional engagement over time, and looking at how brand can actually touch every aspect of a business. And then at the same time as that, through complete coincidence, I was running a pub in North London called The Engineer in Primrose Hill. And we were supporting a charity based in Calcutta. We hosted a kind of cabaret garden party to raise money to launch their London office, and then started doing what Street Smart now do, so adding a percentage to or a pound to people's bills. And I was invited to go to Calcutta and see where the money was going in 2009. So I'd never really had an interest in India, or it hadn't really been on my radar. And I went, and I had, a difficult and very challenging experience, spending a couple of weeks with some people living completely different lives. And then kind of over the last, whatever it is now, 11, 12 years, I think India became this part of my life, and at some point I was commuting back and forth to Bombay, working with a big restaurant client over there. I've been sponsoring some kids for 12 years who are now, they were 12 or 13 years old when I first met them, and now a number of them are off doing their masters. One's going to the University of Dublin to do her masters in economics, and so being involved in these people's journeys, and I'd always wanted to make that a bigger part of my life. And so this next venture, Thumbprint, which we're obviously going to talk about, is a natural progression, I guess, of that bit of my life, and in some way bringing that together with hospitality.
It's really interesting because you talk almost like you have a vocation in life you turn into business opportunity. And Sean Askinowski from Askinowski Chocolate, I interviewed him the other day, and he talks about that, the importance of finding your vocation in most thing you do and finding a way to scale that, because that's gonna make you feel that you will live with purpose. I don't know, is that the similar kind of feeling you feel, and it almost like a journey you didn't expect to happen?
Definitely. And I think, as we go about our lives and we dabble and we experiment, I'm a great fan of late specialization and experimentation, and with this idea of never fully settling, and I think not having that tunnel vision where you're kind of, well, I work in this now, and so that's what I've got to do. And actually then through going through that journey of learning about yourself and what really matters to you and what sits beneath the kind of surface level stuff that we're all bombarded with, and informs a lot of the way that we live on a day to day. I think joining up your kind of, we call it purpose if you like, but I think joining up the reason that you exist and the things that you hold dear with the thing that you do every day. And that's effectively what we're trying to do.
Tell us a bit more about Thumbprint, and where you are now, and what the purpose or the mission of that is, and what you're set out to change.
Yeah, so we're straight out the traps with Thumbprint. We've been out in the world for, I think, about 3 weeks now, and the essence of it actually is this idea of community. And I think I've always been inspired by that notion of bringing people together, and in a hospitality setting, it's, that wonderful thing that happens when you put staff, customers, people from all walks of life together, and seeing how everyone benefits from that. And I guess, that's the essence of what a good brand is. And that's the essence of what Thumbprint is. And so, in a nutshell, the beginning of Thumbprint was, I was trying to start a charity in the lockdown in late 2019, and then lockdown happened. And my passion is to try and get girls into school, because when you educate girls, they hopefully help themselves, help their families, help the communities. They marry later, they have fewer children, they reduce the population burden on the planet, and it's a big piece of what David Attenborough talks about, is if we can get girls into school, reduce the population peak, make it peak sooner and earlier, then it makes everything else that we have to do easier. So there's a real environmental piece here, but honestly, it's about that. It's about that personal story of like being involved with people's lives completely accidentally. Look, this amazing change. I didn't do much. They just needed a little bit of a nudge. And so when the charity bit became impossible, there were a couple of light bulb moments that happened. I was at a charity event, and they were selling these well-made but really crudely designed laptop bags, and they were made by women from this community in South Bombay. A lot of them illiterate, from very, very difficult personal circumstances. And of course, everybody has a sewing machine because they have to mend and make do. They can't afford to go out and buy something just because it breaks. And so that was one of those things where I was like, okay, wow, actually, that was that light bulb moment number one. And the second one was realizing, well, one of the biggest barriers to getting kids into school, or specifically getting girls into school in the developing world, is the parents don't see the value of educating their daughters, because the daughter is a commodity which will be sold via the dowry system to a husband. The family benefit from that. So the boys have to go to school because they have to get the job because they're the pension. So in essence, if we can get women into work, we can change their attitude to educating their daughters, and we can get girls into school. And so that was really what we set out to do. The fact that we then thought, well, let's make T-shirts is actually, by the by, it was a charity that we were trying to set up in the first place.
And how did you organize all that? Because it sounds like, you need to organize something that happens in South Bombay, probably a slum area, I guess, where I guess you don't go online to organize these people. That's like a whole setup, a supply chain. It's not like, from idea to where you are now, where you launched, you have your crowdfunder going. Yeah. There's probably been, lots of challenges, I could imagine.
Yeah, and compounded by the fact that until recently my co-founder was in Panama, so we had this lovely time zone challenge where she'd be up at the crack of dawn, and the guys in India would be just before bedtime, and trying to do everything over Zoom, because at the time, we couldn't travel. So everything was done online, and the sampling process of getting things sent back and forward, and fabric samples and everything else, it was a real challenge, which is why it took us, the seed of the idea, let's say, was summer 2020, and it's why it's taken us nearly 2 years to get there, because everything happened super slowly. And the setup that we have is that we have a partner charity, because the other serendipitous thing was that there were these two guys from this community who would set up this small production training studio. So they were already making stuff. They were already employing these women. So actually it was a complete coincidence that we ended up working and partnering with them. So I think if we'd had to have set that whole piece up from scratch, we'd still be there, But what it was about was saying, well, how do we now bridge the gap between their current capability and the quality that we need to be able to deliver to create a product that's going to be acceptable for a Western audience?
And I was one of the things I was thinking as well, that why you said it ended with a T-shirt almost by accident or because of the process. So why a T-shirt? Why a fashion brand? Because you said yourself in the early part of this conversation, I spent my time in hospitality. What was like fashion brand is also a whole new industry to attack.
Don't I know it? No, I think in my naivety, understanding brand, understanding to a degree the cause that we're trying to support. I wouldn't say I'm an expert in development or social impact, but I've got a sense of it because I've been in and out of it for 12 or 13 years. And in my naivety, I thought, well, T-shirts must be the easiest thing to make. It's just a couple of pieces of fabric. And it turns out that actually T-shirts are really fucking hard to make. And so, as usual, I like to kind of, I like to go great guns with things. And sometimes I'm guilty of not listening properly to other people, so we end up making mistakes. But yeah, it was just, well, T-shirts must be easy. Everybody loves a good T-shirt. They're a blank canvas for other brands, and that was always part of our thing. Was we came up with this line of connecting conscious citizens with the brands they love and the people that make their clothes as our kind of, big idea, if you like. So it was always that Thumbprint was going to be this brand that worked with other brands to create that lovely kind of triangular relationship, if you like. So yes, if I had the time again, would I do T-shirts? I think I probably would, but it was tough. It was tough, you know.
Creating a fashion brand that makes T-shirt, and that there's so many others probably making good quality T-shirt, also with some kind of impact. But what really was puzzling my mind as I was preparing for this, what is actually making you guys so unique compared to them? Or you call it from a brand experience, or why is it that you are solving something that's more important than other T-shirt companies?
Yeah. No, it's a very good question, and I think, you know, this idea of combining sustainable fashion with social impact, I'm not aware of other brands out there that are doing that to the level that we are, and actually the jumping off point being that impact piece. You know, it's not an afterthought, or it's not something that comes out of a branding exercise. That is the reason we exist. You know, as I said, we set out to start a charity. The reason we exist is to change the opportunities and that whole kind of landscape for girls and women from low-income communities in India. What we don't want to do is to tell that story in the wrong way. We're really conscious of that. So I think we've got to have, or the aspiration is to have, a very crisp, aesthetically pleasing brand that sits on a par with, you know, other independent fashion brands in the UK or in the West or wherever, but that also has this social impact. And so I think it's the balance of those two things that makes us unique. And it's also, I think, the commitments that we make within, that are baked into the business model that I'm not aware of other brands doing.
Yeah, it's very interesting that your focus is on the women, and I think that goes to other parts of the world. Like that's what David Attenborough talks about as well. I've been in Africa way part myself, and in my 20s I have actually saved up some money I want to go to give to this fishermen's village in Kenya. And I did one big mistake. I had the money, I got to there, we saw how they lived. It was game changing, like your trip to India, and I gave the money to the man I thought I should give it to. But 3 hours later, after we came back from a tour, seen some crocodiles and stuff, all the men were sitting and drinking in the local cafe, and they were drinking up all the money, and they just couldn't understand. And that, you know, and then there was like, I got quite frustrated and trying to approach this man and tell him, and then there was like a priest there, and he told me, you can't give the money to the man or the opportunities, you need to give it to the women. They can translate it in. We are either sending themselves or their kids to education, because they think about the community more than the man. And it was like such a, you know, I don't know if he was right or wrong, but it was like, wow, okay. That's like quite a crazy experience, and therefore I really believe you're onto something there with such a unique focus. You know, you're doing one T-shirt, and I talk a lot about doing one thing well. I really like that. But how do you bring that to life then? So you started the crowdfunder. You found the women that can make the T-shirt. They're ready to go. How do you bring that purpose, vision, this impact journey to life in your everyday thing? And how can I, as consumer or business, get involved?
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, the getting involved piece is really simple, and I think there are two things. One is jump onto the website or onto our crowdfunding page and buy a T-shirt. And from a kind of business perspective, you know, we're working on a number of interesting merchandise collaborations at the moment with some really great hospitality, food and drink brands. And I think that's really, for us, in terms of we've got to go slow. If we can get half a dozen really brilliant clients bought in early on and almost form that initial community around our business, then that puts us in a great position in 12 months' time to go further. So that's kind of how people can get involved. I guess it's as simple as that. You know, we'd love to speak to anybody who's got a need for merch and kind of buys into the idea of working with a company that's in its infancy. We're slow, we're still quite expensive, but we're trying to do something really different.
And you mentioned, you know, get to a point where we can grow, because I guess that, you know, like anything to be sustainable, it needs to have growth, profit. Is a business in the end of the day selling the T-shirt, and you need to make sure you can pay and provide for the ladies that's doing these t-shirts. So what is your view as you came from this, your very unique point of view from purpose and vacation? What is your view on growth then?
Yeah.
When is enough?
Well, when we've ended gender equality globally would be the lofty answer, but I'm not going to. That's not the answer, I don't think, because it would be very naive of me to sit here and say that I think that's what we're trying to do. But in a way, there's plenty of people that can benefit from this model, and our strategy. If you ask me what sits in the business plan, is to create a network of employee-owned studios around the world. So whilst we're focusing initially on South Bombay and then maybe India as a whole, and we can go to different cities and we can expand capacity that way, there's no reason at all why we can't go to produce in South America or in Africa. There's absolutely a possibility. And that interesting model of kind of we come with the order book and we help to create these employee-owned suppliers effectively. So wouldn't it be amazing if we could work out, well, what does a kind of factory in a box look like? We need £25,000 and that gets us, the equipment, the premises, the training, the impact piece to be able to employ 25 people, for example. And then what we actually do is we facilitate local financing so that a local business will invest in that business and that business is then owned by the women who work there. So we can then have this network of suppliers, wherever we want to have them, that are really grassroots in the community, employing women, and they own a part of the business. And the second part of that is we've registered our own charitable foundation, and we're taking £1 from every garment that we sell, and we're funneling that into grassroots education projects, and that money then goes to educating younger girls in the community. So it's this whole piece of actually looking at this in the round. Yes, get the women into work. Yes, change their attitude to educating girls, but then actually help to fund getting the girls into school. And so one of the reasons our price point is where it is at the moment is because we're taking a big chunk out, paying double the local living wage, because that's what our impact assessment suggested that we needed to pay to actually be able to have a genuine stability for these women who might be sole breadwinners in their families. They have 2.5 children per family, and also being able to make this charitable argument as well.
And that's super interesting. You from the outset have really thought like in detail about how the business is going to impact, downstream the situation. And I guess you also thought about upstream, because lots of businesses, I don't know anything about fashion, but I definitely know in the food system, there's lots of people that just know the first layer of the supply chain. Then when they start to dive into it, they either get a shock and don't want to look at it anymore, or they go and deal with it.
Yeah.
We had Tom Barton on the podcast, and at that point, I think it's almost a year now, he talked about regenerative farming. Now they've done it because he's been on this 3-year journey down the meat supply chain in his own supply chain.
Yeah.
Do you think also that's where you can make most impact as a business? If you want to be a force for good, you actually start in your own supply chain and start working down there and understand how that works and how you can be really a big part of changing that.
I think you probably have to. And I think also you've got to go slow from that point of view as well, because if you look at the complexities, we've got to buy fabric. We need to make sure that fabric is what it says it is. It's a huge challenge in India. 2 of the big certifying bodies of organic cotton farming have pulled out of the country completely because they can't even work out whether stuff's authentic or not. So it's a total minefield. So, you've got that piece, and then that opens the door to actually the well-being of the farmers and their families. So it's a minefield. And then you've got the dyeing piece. Where are your dyes coming from? We've got plant-based dyes for everything except black. We can't find a supplier of black plant-based dye at the moment, so we're using a kind of relatively environmentally friendly dye. So there's that piece, and then you've got labels. At the moment, our labels are made in the UK from polyester, so they're totally unsustainable and bloody expensive. So that's something that we've got to get fixed. So the complexities in the supply chain are huge. So we've got to get there at some point. We're not there yet, and we won't be there for a while. But what we've got to do is focus on one thing at a time. And right now, we want to make sure that 12 women have enough work so that they can go home and provide for their families, and that's where we have to start. But yes, going deep into the supply chain, I think is a non-negotiable. It's very easy to go out like all the big chains are at the moment. The COS's and the Arquettes and the H&M's of this world, and making a big, song and dance about sustainable organic fabric, well, that's the only drum they can bang because they don't know anything else, but they can make that claim, and that's why that is the prevailing message. But actually, if you use regenerative agriculture, regenerative farming as a principle, why can fashion not be regenerative? In a way, we're trying to repair these communities. We're trying to help them become better, cleaner, safer, more equal places to live.
Yeah, and I guess that one of the two things I definitely have read about as well is that there's definitely enough clothes to dress the world population and more on. So we should actually reuse more of that. And then also, again, comes back to food. We eat, or we produce, almost 5,000 calories a day. We need about 2.5 or 2 to 2,500 as human beings. So we can also feed the planet. There's so many things if we really put our mind to it, because we've done incredible things as human. We could really solve some big problems. Do you think that business really is the way to make the world a better place? Because there's so many challenges in the world, and it feels like there's a lot of people turning to business and say, we need you to step up.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to be, because we can all have these conversations about martyrdom and the only way to save the world is to regress and to live simpler. And I think there's a part of that, but the reality is we live in a capitalist world, and businesses are always going to want to make money. People are always going to want to buy stuff. And I think, it's naive to think otherwise. It's like looking at travel. You think, well, everyone bangs on about, you shouldn't fly anymore. But actually, yes, you shouldn't fly unnecessarily. But the world is connected. And if you don't do that, then what is the knock-on effect? Countries like South Africa, looking at them completely crippled because such a high percentage of their GDP comes from tourism, and they haven't had any, and the country's falling over. Sri Lanka, so all of these things. So I think we've got to have a realistic conversation about, yes, we've got to buy less, we've got to buy better, all of those, well used cliches. But yes, I think it is, given we've got a completely inept government, how business can actually take responsibility for that. And I think we've got to move away, without sounding preachy or kind of too worthy. We've got to move away from innovation for innovation's sake. And I think we waste an awful lot of resources, talent, time, creativity on really stupid things. I saw on LinkedIn this morning, Heinz have come up with a spoon-shaped chip to get your perfect chip to thingy ratio. And yes, we need a bit of fun and we need these gimmicks in our life. I'm not saying we all become this kind of like boring, worthy, But at the same time, like, if you can channel that level of originality and creativity into doing something that's fundamentally built on impact rather than purpose. I like purpose, but I think I like to talk about impact. I always use this example of like a mayonnaise company doesn't need to have a world-changing purpose. A mayonnaise company could just be like, I want to make the best mayonnaise in the world, or I want to sell more mayonnaise in the world. And that's a good purpose. But actually, what impact are you making by being the best mayonnaise in the UK or globally or whatever it is? You can have an impact, and I think divorcing impact and purpose, and maybe we're getting into brand semantics, but I think that's for me an interesting conversation. Is brands that can't have a purpose need to have an impact, and that needs to, I think, again become a non-negotiable.
But I guess like just holding on to the purpose and impact bit, which I actually agree with you. It's often purpose is thrown around, but I had yesterday I was lucky to spend some hours with David Lockwood from Neal's Yard Dairy, and he said and he always reminds me with their purpose, mission. He call it what you want. He says we want to make British cheese better. That's why we're here. And that's why what we all are working on every day, just a little bit better. And if we do that better, we help the farmer. And that's interesting. Again, they don't have like gonna save the world kind of thing, but that's really important because that's food. That's something we eat. And if we do that better, we will get a better world.
And the impact they have is huge because they're helping to support the livelihood of X number of farmers in the UK and, putting British cheese on the map, all of that. It's all great stuff. And I think that's what I mean. It's not necessarily, your purpose doesn't have to give that away. It's the impact piece, because if you start talking about impact over purpose, then no one's got anywhere to hide, because if the purpose is that, as you say with Neal's Yard, but actually, what's the impact you're having. So I think that impact agenda for me is really interesting.
Where you? What is the next step for you guys and the journey you're on? You launched. You have a crowdfunder up. We already talked a bit about that. But what is like the next 3 months? How do they look for you?
So we've got to get these initial early adopter hospitality businesses on board, get some really great merch done for them, really to get the cash flow in to be able to buy better machinery, make everything else that we've got to do easier, and then take this crowdfund to its natural completion. And we'd love to smash our target. If we don't, it's not the end of the world, but we would like to. And then understand
what target are we aiming for?
500 t-shirts. Yeah, it's about 25 grand. Then we've got to then develop our premium basics range for our own direct-to-consumer sales, which will be a very small capsule collection of 4 to 6 garments. So we might do a sweater, we might do some pants or something, but I think it's probably going to be t-shirts and tops. And to get to that point, we've got to continue building this small but very engaged community initially, because we need the feedback. How does that cut work on a woman of that shape? How does that cut work on a man of that size? And actually, because we've got to get the quality of the product right, we need that real life information feedback, and we want this group of people to feel that they're part of that process. So if we can get to this time next year and we've got half a dozen brilliant premium basic products on our website, and we've got some interesting brand collaborations, which we might sell through our website, but also obviously those businesses would retail those as merchandise. I think that looks like success for us. And then at that point, it's about probably going out and doing, a bit of a raise to plug the gap in our understanding of how fashion works. So I think, given that I bang on about industry specialism all the time, I really believe that, you can be a generalist as I am, but my specialism, my niche is hospitality. Why? Because I remember what it was like to be 22 and being promoted to a supervisor at Soho House, thinking I know everything, but at the same time knowing nothing. And I think, we're talking about hospitality concepts and brands and launching those, which I still do. I split my time, 3 days on consulting work, 2 days on Thumbprint. My big message for brand is, I'm not a marketer. Dan, who was on your show last week, thoroughly rate him. I think if you want great outwards looking stuff, Dan's your man. Your social media, messaging, storytelling. My bit is brand experience and the internal piece. And so, I like to be in there and building out that guest experience and understanding all of those crucial touch points. So I'm conscious of the benefit of working with me from a hospitality specialism point of view. So translating that through to Thumbprint, we've got to build up that foundational knowledge and then bring somebody else in to help take it to the level that we need to be competitive and achieve that ultimate growth plan.
So super interesting. And we will put everything in the show notes about where you are, and if people are thinking, what is that crowdfunder about, and that they can click the link. But you already touched a bit about what is the most pressing issue that you would like to be solved here in the world, because there's so many of them. But as a business person and a founder of Thumbprint, and what else, what is you already talked about women. Is that if we fix that problem, are we then on the right course? Women in education.
It's nothing to do with either. Well, it's to do with education. I think if I could solve one issue, and this comes from a personal point of view rather than necessarily a professional one, I think it's the way that we educate our kids. And I think there is this awful pressure on children to go through this ridiculous funnel of, you do 12 GCSEs, 3 or 4 A-levels, 1 degree, 1 master's, and you're told that you've got this little window where you've got to decide what you want to do. You're almost thinking about your career when you're 12 or 13 years old, and then if you don't make it in those years post-graduation, you fucked it for life. And I just think that's such a dangerous message because it discourages experimentation and exploration. And the other big challenge is we don't teach mental health in schools. And I think it's mental. I've had huge problems with mental health. I've done therapy for on and off for the last 7 years, and I did a sustained period of about 3.5 years at the beginning of those 7. And I just think that one of the most powerful things is for you to become increasingly conscious of who you are and what makes you tick and the things that sit under the surface that inform those subconscious behaviours. And I think if we can get kids to understand themselves better at an earlier age, we can create a kinder society which will benefit everybody.
Well, that's super interesting because I had a similar conversation the other day, and I can remember, that's an early pandemic where I interviewed Chip Conley from the States, and he has his little resort down in Mexico now where you in principle go and find yourself in your midlife and how you can do these transformation. And he talked a bit about that, many things you do in life, you become very aware, you do them to become the person you want to become. And it's not about the education you take and so on, as you said. It's like actually how can you actually lead yourself? So mental health and so on. Actually be honest with yourself and go and deal with it. But we don't have the tools to do that. So we end in these crises, as you said. Mm. And I think definitely if we talk about our industry, hospitality, let's definitely talk about a mental health crisis, which I think is just going to escalate because of the pressure of operational challenges, if we just take them. That's also probably going to be even worse challenges coming ahead. I don't have a crystal ball. I wouldn't be sitting here if I knew what was happening in the crystal ball, but I think it's going to be even tougher. And I think that mental health pressure is really interesting, that we don't have these tools if we don't go and seek them out ourselves or go and get help. And
exactly. And where do you look for stuff? I don't want to get on that very well banged social media drum, but it's very damaging. It's fucking us up, because we sit here in our reality and we look at other people's polished, veneered versions of their lives, and there's so much success out there, and all of that narrative rises to the surface, and it just demoralizes everybody. If you're 14, 15 years old, it's bad enough at 38, and I think we've got a real problem here bubbling under the surface, and I think that's why we need to build in that understanding and that resilience much earlier on, because if we're going to continue to bring kids into this digital world, and don't even get me started on the metaverse, to get kids brought into this digital world, then we've got to sort that problem out, because again, I love cliches because they become cliches because they're true. But you've got to put your own mask on first, and we can be most beneficial to others when we're all right, and increasingly on a day-to-day basis we're not all right. And I think that's that's crucial. And then the picture of you've got to do massive raises and the valuation and everything else. I'm not against that. I've got plenty of friends that have grown successful businesses, but it's not the only route. And where's the voice for the other route? The slow, steady, calm route,
That's super interesting. I'm going to make a connection again. We had Matt Lederhausen on the show, former top executive for McDonald's, that now has B Course. It's an impact investment company. And he talks a lot about giving companies the time to actually develop that business and grow within that. So actually having that patience as investors. So you're not talking a 3-year plan and then we sell, and maybe we're never going to sell. Maybe actually we're just going to build a great business that's going to work for every stakeholder, and we hang on for 10 or 20 years. And I think if you go back in time, and I actually talked with David from Neal's Yacht about that, and they are a great example of that yesterday. He talks also about that, it's not about when we hit some point, it's about what we can do today and actually make sure that all stakeholders win tomorrow. And I think that's that thought about there was only a shareholder that has to win. That's what probably needs to change if we want to change the output and the impact as you're seeking for. That's really interesting you brought that up. But one of the things I was thinking about as well, preparing for this, Ed, was that, because you just mentioned, even the last 7 years have been challenging. What about the last 2 years? Because you've gone through huge amount of challenge. And what have been, your main learnings as, a business lead, as an individual, and what did you take away from it, or what are you still on a journey with?
I think living a simpler life has been the main takeaway. And, I think I've lived in London since I was 20, so 18 years, nearly half of my life, and this is an amazing place to be. But at the same time, there are a lot of external factors that I think sometimes pull you away from your kind of true natural self, and again, for me, it's about the beauty of therapy and understanding, or beginning to understand mental health, is that what you do is you equip yourself with all of these tools to be able to deal with negativity, depression, intrusive thoughts, stress, whatever it is. And you I'm not saying you'll ever get in the point where you can control your thoughts, but you can certainly have a bit of a game of whack-a-mole with yourself. and I think that actually, had I not done that, the last 2 years would have been really difficult, because that we lost a huge amount of work at the beginning of the pandemic. 2 huge, 6-figure projects were pulled. We scrabbled around, did some bits and pieces, and it has been tough. But luckily, we've just about scraped through. And then I decided to close down my agency 4 or 5 months ago, go out as a one-man band brand consultant, and then allow Thumbprint to kind of begin to come out into the world. So the biggest learnings for me, I guess, have just been actually to go a bit slower. As someone who loves a good night out and some nice stuff, stop spending so much money.
And how did you? Because when we're in that, and I know it for myself, and it could be you're working on things you're really interested in, you really want to change something. How do you go slower? In principle, you're saying if we go slower, we can probably go faster and better. With the right things. But how do you do that? Because you're in that, lots of people out there listening, but I'm in that, I need to do all the things, the hamster wheel, we call it as well.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's a reality to time at the moment. I do still have a relatively busy consulting life. So from a Thumbprint perspective, it only has a limited amount of time that I can justify spending on it at the moment. And I think that, that's probably the right way to go about it, given the challenges we've talked about in terms of needing to understand the fashion industry. We're working with these guys that are, they're not a factory where we can place an order and get it made. It needs a bit of hand-holding. But on a kind of broader point, I've become very good, because I've had to, because my mental health suffers, I've become very good at structuring the way and how and when I work, and getting into this really nice rhythm. And my girlfriend at the beginning thought I was completely crazy, but now she, I think, has come round to the idea. I would say to her, right, I do work late Monday, I do work late Wednesday, and then Tuesday, Thursday and Friday I do 9 till 6. And on Tuesdays, Thursdays and Fridays I do client work. I do all my meetings on a Wednesday every week. Monday I never do anything except sit at the office at home and work on stuff. And so I'm very structured in how I work, and work will always occupy the space you allow it to. So if it's 6 o'clock on a Friday, I'm closing my laptop, even if I'm halfway through an email. I'm going to the pub. I sometimes work on a weekend if I feel compelled to do it, and it's usually on things that are enjoyable or exciting or pleasurable, or the stuff that I often don't find time to do during the week. But again, it's a very rhythmic thing. If I feel like it, I will, and if I don't, I won't. So I think it's how we live our days is how we live our lives, and I don't want to make these enormous sacrifices today for something that may or may not happen tomorrow. I don't want to work 100 hours a week, and every hour that God sends. It works for some people, works for Gary Vaynerchuk, doesn't work for me. And that's I think just keeping that perspective and keeping that balance.
It's really interesting that you actually used your calendar to book out time.
Oh, I time block like crazy for everything. Yeah.
What has the biggest learning been with that? Because people say, oh, well, you can't there will be meeting that needs to happen on days where you blocked out the time. What has your learning been with that? Because I'm very similar in a kind of way. I do it a bit different, but I also block out time.
I think everything works until it doesn't, and we all go through these kind of cycles and these swings and roundabouts, whatever you want to call it, where we have time where we're super engaged and we've got loads of energy, and then we have time where we're not so engaged and have less energy. And so I think have that structure. Don't worry if you deviate from it. You've got to get to a point, I think, where you just trust yourself to do the right thing. I'm obsessive over to-do lists and notes and this, that and the other, but ultimately sometimes I just put all that to one side and I'm just like, you know what? I'm being drawn to working on this today, and I'm going to work on that. And the beauty from a kind of structural perspective of being a religious time blocker is that if you've put in, and I always add on 25% interruption time, so if I think something's going to take 3 hours, I'll probably put it in for 4, is that you can then literally in your calendar start prioritizing by moving things around. And so I think that's really nice. And keeping a to-done list as well. I always do a to-done list at the end of the day to give myself that satisfaction when you feel like, oh fuck, I haven't achieved anything. But actually, when you write down what you have achieved, you always feel that kind of comfort that you've got some really good stuff done.
And that's super interesting, because often if you work on the right things, it's not easy, quick fix things. It's processing something big. It could be, a document, or it could be a project where, if you move the needle 5% that day, that's quite a lot. And often we forget that, and we get that feeling. And then we get busy doing quick things, emails, all these distractions. Another interesting thing you said I really liked was as well that, when you start to put this in your calendar, because I meet a lot of people say, I'm too busy to that. Have you actually start really booking the time out for the 20% that gives you 80%? Everything in life, play, work, whatever it has to be, time with family, and just book it out. You don't need to follow it, but you then suddenly find out, I can't commit to any more this week. I can't go to that network thing. I can't do that. And because I need to do the 20% that give me 80% before I can commit to any further. And I think, and then you find out the 20, also when you start thinking about the 20%, you said indirectly, you find out there's actually a few things I need to do to really have the impact I need to have.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just, feeling the feelings that you're feeling and the energy levels, and I think just becoming conscious of that. I was really ill this week, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday morning. I hardly got out of bed. I've had some form of awful summer man flu, not COVID. I've been testing. And, I was super stressed by Wednesday because I thought, oh my God, I've got 5 days work of work to do in 2 days. And I started putting stuff in for the weekend, and I just thought, no, it's the middle of summer. The weather's beautiful. It'll just wait. I think these self-imposed deadlines that we give ourselves, they're very rarely deadlines. And I made a note to talk about this, so maybe it's a good kind of segue back to hospitality and Thumbprint and whatever else is, I suffer from this impatience sometimes. I just want to get stuff done, and we kept pushing the launch of Thumbprint back and back and back and back because we weren't ready. This was problematic. This wasn't right, etc., etc. And someone saying in one ear, well, perfectionism is the enemy of whatever the expression is, and someone else is saying, oh, you've just got to get going. And we launched, and actually I bloody wish we'd waited 2 more weeks, because I feel like in hindsight we didn't quite get the marketing lined up correctly for the crowdfund, and as a result that hasn't taken off as we expected. Again, I'm not worried about it. We'll get there. So there is this kind of always this tension, isn't there, between this kind of patience, go slow, get stuff right, but that inertia that I think a lot of entrepreneurs have to get stuff going.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely been, I can really recognize that myself, but very been difficult in the pandemic. You talked about how difficult it was to get, the T-shirt. It's taken you 2 years to get here because things has just moved slower. That's one of the things, if everybody could take that learning about going slower, I think it would be better for all of us. But we have that impatience ingrained in us when we run our own business and involved in things, because we sometimes forget it's actually a lot of small things that comes together that makes the outcome, the results, or what you actually.
But also living with those, strategic touch points that you've put in place. Purpose, mission, vision, values, whatever you want to call them. But our values are work hard, be kind, don't compromise. And I think the be kind bit is amazing. And I think if we look at the conversations that we're having now day to day, that those three, above and beyond purpose, mission and vision, those three values are the things that we're talking about, and that I feel are really already embedded in the business. If you're going to be kind, you've got to consider other people. You've got to be empathetic to other people's challenges, whether it's my co-founder having a busy week, so she needs to just switch off for 5 days, whether it's the guys in India getting a bit tetchy because we haven't placed an order with them when we said we would, and they're like, well, where's the next order? And that piece around kindness is just so important. The hard work piece, is a natural thing. I think there's a tension possibly between those two things, and then this idea of not compromising. If we're going to build a really long-living business, if we're going to sell a really fantastic product, which at the end of the day, the impact piece only works if the product's amazing. If we're not going to compromise, something there has to give. Kindness has a tension with working hard, because we don't want people to, sacrifice their own well-being in pursuit of hard work. But at the same time, we've got this piece around compromise, and I love those three together, and hopefully you can kind of see that tension that's there, and it's lovely then to have a conversation about, well, what do those mean to this particular challenge or this particular week or this particular person.
Yeah, and I guess also you will never be done satisfying those values, because there's always an imperfect balance between them. I like the one, the kindness. I guess also that's kindness, as you said, to yourself. That it's okay. It's 6 o'clock. I'm going to close, and it's weekend. I'm going to go out and enjoy the weather, because there's always work. Never disappears. It's always there. Always there. One question I always ask about, and I think you will have some, as you work with a lot of brands and you help them on setting themselves up for success or taking them from one place to another, and now you launched another business again, and a charity on top of that, and all the impact. But what is like your top advice, if because a lot of business leaders out there, they want to do good, they want to have a business that's a force for good, but sometimes it's going to be a bit cloudy, and well, what do I do? Where do I start?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that question, because I'm so young in this journey of building a business as a force for good. We're as I said, 3 or 4 weeks old, and I think for me it comes back to what we were talking about earlier. As a founder, really knowing what it is that makes you tick, knowing yourself, aligning your personal principles with and there's things that you're passionate about with the business. I think you're going to have a better life, and hopefully you're going to build a better business. And I think a lot of people, maybe I'm skeptical, I feel like there's a bit of bandwagoning, this is the order of the day. We've all got to be sustainable. We've all got to have a purpose. We've all got to do this, that, and the other. But I think it's got to be aligned with your personal principles if it's a founder-led business, And I think, that comes back to this piece of understanding yourself and understanding the way that your mind works. So I don't know if that's advice or an opinion, but if you're going to go out and do something that you really give a fuck about, and think about impact over purpose, I think.
Yeah, I guess, because if you gonna stick with it on the journey, it really needs to touch you deeply. And I guess that goes also if you're not even the founder. It could also be a local thing you do. Let's say you as a GM for a restaurant shop, and then there's something local you can do with your local beavers, or any kind of thing where actually you make their life a little bit better. In a way.
I think so. I think that piece around, another word, community, is bandied around so much. And, I get a lot of, well, why don't you do something in the UK, or why India, or, accusation of white saviour syndrome. And I don't really want to be drawn into that topic. But for me, India was accidental. It could have been anywhere. I happened to go there by mistake. I liked it. I had this, I met these kids. I became, in some tiny way, part of their stories, and they became a huge part of mine. And I think, community for me is about being a part of a group of people that you care for and that you feel naturally compelled to support. And yes, that could be geographically close to where you live, but also it might not be. I think the important bit is we are much better when we're together. And in the world that we live in, that can be any corner of the world. I think it's just you've got to really feel it,
It's quite interesting, because I was listening to, I was not reading on the train this morning up to London. I was listening to an audiobook, and the pandemic, I become very interesting what the Stoic did. And also a friend of mine said, read about the Stoic, Michael. It's going to be a tough journey. And I done, and it's really, really insightful. And they said one of the principles is that you actually, if you want a great life, there's a balance. you need to do something for others. It doesn't need to be something really game-changing, but go in your local community and do small things. It could be helping out at the cake selling at school, or it could whatever it can be. It can be that you pick up litter. You do those things because actually they give you so much, but without expecting anything again.
Yeah.
And I think we don't need to do big things. We can just do small things. And then, of course, that's also okay to do big things.
Yeah.
But the whole Stoic thing is that when you engage in that and become part of helping the community you live in, it makes you feel better, and therefore you get more energy, you become a more positive person.
I've used this really wanky phrase, living partly in the service of others, for a while, and but it is kind of, for me, that is the closest I've come to really bottling that balance. It's okay to want to be successful. It's okay to want to have a nice life. It's okay to enjoy nice things, as long as you're doing it for the right reasons and you're not doing it to impress other people. But at the same time, not doing it purely for those reasons, and making sure that you're doing enough, a proportionate amount for other people.
So, Ed, we've been around your journey, launching Thumbprint, why you did it, what the role of business are in making the world a better place. We talked about brand, how they can make impact. You've given some good advice. We've also been on an internal journey about how do you actually, show up every day and the challenge around that. And you had some productivity advice on how to block time out. If people want to connect with you or support the crowdfunder, where do they go?
Sure. So I think it's just important to mention that, and I haven't mentioned her name yet, and I think she deserves as much credit as anybody else for getting us where we are today. So my co-founder, Evgenia, who took a huge punt in joining me on this journey when it was just a seed of an idea. So, you can reach us, and it really is we're equal partners, and we put in equal heart and soul into what we're trying to build. So, I just wanted to mention that, because we ain't a one-man show. And I think we are available at thumbprintapparel.com is our website, or at thumbprint.apparel on Instagram. And from both of those platforms, you can easily find our crowdfunding campaign over on Indiegogo, and there's a little video there that explains more about what we're doing. You can see and you can buy the products. We've got great single items on there, some plain basics, some initial designs. We've got bundles of 3 if you want to buy one for yourself and give 2 to people that you love. And then from a consulting perspective, I'm at edwardfrancis.co, which is my consulting website. And easily find me on LinkedIn and Instagram, and equally Evgenia is on both of those as well. And it goes without saying, we'd love to hear from anybody with thoughts, good or bad, and anyone who wants to talk to us about merchandise or any other aspect of what we're trying to build.
Great. Thank you so much for coming here today. And I send you, you all means people in India as well, all the power and energy that you need to succeed on this journey. And we'll put all the things you just mentioned in the show notes. Thank you for coming.
Very kind of you to have me. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you so much, Ed. Love your deep passion and determination for building a business that can make impact at scale. Ask yourself now, how can I make impact, big or small, right now? If you want to learn more about how to build a business as a force for good, tune in to episode 150. Carly Trisgrow, co-creator of UpUp, talks about how restaurant can catalyze change. A big thank you to BizSimply for supporting us, bringing great insights, strategies and tools to help leaders become better every day. Check them out at bizsimply.com or on their social at BizSimply or at BizSimplyHQ. You can also email them directly at advice@bizsimply.com. Thank you to Fina Charlton, the show producer and editor from the Podcast Collective. I really appreciate that you're listening in. So if you enjoyed today's conversation, please share, rate, review, or subscribe to one of our channels, which all can be done via the website hospitalitymavericks.com. If you have any ideas and feedback for the show or other thoughts, reach out via LinkedIn or via my email, michael@hospitalitymavericks.com. Tune in next time for another interview. And in the meantime, find out more about us and subscribe to the weekly newsletter Maverick Talk via hospitalitymavericks.com. I'm Michael Tingser, and you've been listening to the Hospitality Maverick podcast show. Be Maverick.